Imagine you get hit by a government truck, and your first thought is, I'll just sue them. Yeah, about that. There is this ancient legal concept called sovereign immunity, and it is basically the government's way of saying, you cannot touch us, which sounds made up until it happens to you. Sovereign immunity goes all the way back to medieval England, where the idea was that the king literally could not do wrong in the eyes of the law. We kept that tradition going in America, which is a little ironic for a country that started by telling the king to take a hike. Here's where it gets interesting, though. The government has actually waived, meaning voluntarily given up, some of that immunity over the years. The Federal Tort Claims Act of 1946 lets you sue the federal government under certain conditions, which is basically the feds putting up a small open for lawsuits sign on their giant fortress door. State governments have their own versions of this, and every single state does it differently, which is the legislative equivalent of every restaurant making its own sauce, but refusing to share the recipe. Some states are pretty generous with what they allow, and others make you jump through so many hoops you would think they were training Olympic gymnasts. Now, tribal immunity is a whole different universe, and this is where even experienced lawyers slow down and squint a little. Federally recognized tribes are considered sovereign nations, which means they carry their own immunity that is separate from both state and federal rules. Tribal sovereign immunity is actually stronger in some ways than government immunity. Because tribes did not give it up through a general law, each waiver has to be specific and intentional. So if a tribal enterprise, like a casino or a business, hurts you, your ability to sue depends entirely on whether that tribe has explicitly agreed to be sued in that context. Some tribes have waived immunity for their commercial operations, meaning the business side of things, while keeping immunity intact for governmental functions. Think of it like a tribe saying, you can argue with our gift shop, but not with our council. And that distinction genuinely matters for your case. The critical first move for any accident lawyer handling these cases is figuring out who exactly you are dealing with before anything else happens. If a government vehicle hits you, you need to know if it is city, county, state, or federal, because the filing rules, deadlines, and damage caps can be completely different for each one. One of the sneakiest traps in these cases is the notice of claim requirement, which is basically a formal heads-up you have to file with the government before you can even think about a lawsuit. Miss that deadline, sometimes as short as 60 days, and your case can evaporate completely, no matter how solid your evidence is. Lawyers in this space spend a lot of time just mapping out the legal landscape before ever drafting a complaint. It is like planning a hiking trip, where half the trails are blocked, 2 are one way, and one trail is owned by a nation that plays by entirely different rules. There are also consent to sue clauses buried in contracts that tribal entities sometimes include, which can quietly open a legal door you did not know existed. Reading the fine print on any agreement involving tribal businesses is not optional, it is the entire game. Damages caps are another reality check in these cases, because even when you can sue, the government often limits how much they will pay out. The Federal Tort Claims Act, for example, caps what you can get in certain ways and bans punitive damages entirely, meaning the big dramatic courtroom win you saw on TV is not quite how it works here. What makes a great injury lawyer in this space is not just knowing the law, it is knowing which version of the law applies to your exact situation before the clock runs out. Jurisdiction is not a technicality here, it is the whole story. If you get hurt and a government or tribal entity might be involved, the single most important thing you can do is call a lawyer immediately. Not tomorrow, not after you Google things for an hour. Want to learn more about how our team handles cases just like this? Check the links in the description.